Welcome back. Our top story this evening, new airstrikes launched today, this time on oil facilities run by ISIS in eastern Syria. By targeting ISIS, are America and its allies actually helping al-Qaeda and other terror groups? That's a question.
How does that work?
Yeah.
Let's get some answers from David Gartenstein-Ross, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and Senior Fellow at George Washington University's Homeland Security Policy Institute. Also with us is Paul Cruikshank, CNN terrorism analyst and co-author of Agent Storm, My Life Inside Al-Qaeda and the CIA. Gentlemen, thanks so much for being here. David, I want to start with you. If you weaken ISIS, you strengthen Al-Qaeda. How does that work?
Because the two of them are competitor organizations. ISIS was kicked out of al-Qaeda at the beginning of February, and since then it has pretty aggressively made bids to get affiliates of al-Qaeda and others within the organization to join it. In fact, some analysts believe that it has surpassed al-Qaeda as the leader of global jihad, although I'm very suspicious of those claims. But by targeting ISIS, it creates an incentive for people to go back to al-Qaeda. That's because moving forward, the U.S. is probably going to pretty narrowly target ISIS. Leaving ISIS puts people on firmer footing, but particularly when ISIS's leadership is degraded, which the U.S. strikes will certainly do.
Okay, so Paul, what does that mean? We shouldn't be hitting ISIS because goodness knows we don't want to strengthen al-Qaeda?
Well, the United States is hitting both ISIS and al-Qaeda, the Khorasan group, Jabhat al-Nusra in Syria. So in a sense, it's weakening both. I think the greater danger is because of these strikes against both groups, that the groups could find some sort of common cause, or they could at least stop fighting each other in Syria. That's a very worrying prospect if they could kind of pool resources at some point in the future. We've seen other al-Qaeda affiliates in the region, in North Africa and Yemen, call for al-Qaeda and ISIS to patch up their differences and to focus on hitting the United States.
Hey, Paul, so we have been discussing exactly, how strong is ISIS? Is their strength real? Has the media been overplaying that? Let's talk to us about Khorasan. How strong is Khorasan?
This is a pretty small group, Don, maybe a dozen or more, a few dozen fighters. But this is al-Qaeda's A-team. These are veteran al-Qaeda operatives who've been in the game for more than a decade, have a lot of expertise, experience, all sorts of contacts. And they're trying to recruit Westerners in Syria, Western militants there for plots back in the West. And it doesn't take a very large amount of these militants to put together sophisticated plots in the West. We saw with 9/11, that was just 19 hijackers. We've seen other plots since with fewer amounts of plotters. And al-Qaeda in Yemen had a pretty small external operations division, just a few dozen people at most. And they were able to put together several plots against U.S. aviation, Don.
David, I want to talk about your personal story because you have a fascinating background. You were born and raised Jewish, and then you converted at some point right after college, I believe, to a radical form of Islam. Can you help us understand what on earth is attractive about ISIS or al-Qaeda or Khorasan to Westerners?
Well, that's not entirely the trajectory. I actually converted to a more liberal form of Islam and ended up working for a charity that was in the extremist constellation, and eventually ended up with a more extreme interpretation. At any rate, this is something that was about a decade and a half ago. My first book deals with that experience. I don't think that my own personal experiences answer the question of radicalization. I'd say that there are a number of different pathways that people take in. Some of them are based more on personal understanding of religion or a journey of faith. Some are based more on grievances, and others are based more on other things, like an Australian named David Hicks, for whom sense of adventure seemed to be his primary pathway to radicalism. And there's no one-size-fits-all model for how people end up getting radicalized or drawn to battlefields like Syria.
Quickly, I want to play the president today. He spoke about religion and faith. Let's listen.
There's nothing new about wars within religions. Christianity endured centuries of vicious sectarian conflict. Today, it is violence within Muslim communities that has become the source of so much human misery. It is time to acknowledge the destruction wrought by proxy wars and terror campaigns between Sunni and Shia across the Middle East.
So I want to get a quick response from both of you. First from David. David, is he basically telling Muslim nations to get their acts together?
I think that's what he's doing. I mean, he's calling for people, especially from Muslim states, to stand up to ISIS. One of the reasons he contextualizes this in the context of Christian history, I think, is to make clear that he's not singling out one faith, but that right now problems like this, Al-Qaeda, etc., are something that the Muslim world does need to deal with.
Paul, you agree?
I do, and you know, in the political turmoil that followed the Arab Spring, we've seen all sorts of extremism flourish throughout the region, and at the end of the day, it's that region, the Middle East, that's going to have to deal with it, Don.
All right.
Paul, David, thank you so much.